This school is full of gangsters. They divide themselves into gangs based on smartphone brands. Samsung Gang. All members use Samsung phones. They are in the northern corner. Huawei Gang. All members use Huawei phones. They are in the western corner. Motorola Gang. All members use Motorola phones. They are sitting in the eastern corner. The most awesome gang is the Apple Gang. All members use iPhones. They are in the southern corner. Today is Chris' first day of school. He was shocked when he learned about this rule. iPhones were just released. How did they manage to get them? A senior student next to him said, "There's no way around it. These 6 people are just that resourceful." So the Apple Gang is the top gang in this school. And no one dares to mess with them. Chris asked, "What if I don't have a phone? Which gang should I join?" The senior student replied, "In that case, you'll join the loser gang. You'll have to stand in the corner of the playground and be ready to be bullied by others." Sure enough, Chris soon encountered bullying from the school bully. Campus bullying is happening. Chris just finished class. In the hallway, he encountered Harry. "I've seen you before, Shorty. You don't have a phone. Ah, you loser. Take this bag and the shoe polish in it. From now on, you'll polish my shoes every day. I have to go to class." "No, you have to clean my shoes first." Of course, Chris refused. Harry started getting aggressive. "If you don't polish them, I'll stuff the shoe polish in your mouth." Coincidentally, Mr. Johnson, the teacher, passed by. He asked what was going on and asked Harry what was in the bag. Whether he was bullying the new student again. Harry smiled and tried to run. But the teacher stopped him and asked Chris what was in the bag, expecting Chris to report the incident. But Chris said, "It's nothing, just a sandwich in the bag." Mr. Johnson helplessly walked away. Chris took the opportunity to leave as well, but was stopped by Harry. Chris retorted, "For heaven's sake, I just saved you earlier. You should be thanking me. To hell with you." "Me, thanking you? You should obediently polish the shoes, Shorty." The two parted ways unhappily. And that's how Chris' first day of school ended, with a conflict with Harry. Chris didn't tell his dad about the bullying incident when he got home, but he expressed a desire to buy a mobile phone. For his personal safety. Chris comes from a divorced family, and they are not financially well off. When his dad heard that it would cost money, he immediately objected. "We live in such a small town. If you shout, the police will come." Chris nodded helplessly. It seemed that he would have to work and earn money himself. In fact, Chris has had a part-time job for the past 5 years. Every week, he reads books to a wealthy man. He earns $5 per hour and started saving money. But his dad couldn't bear to see his son suffer. After more than 10 days, on Chris' birthday, his dad gave him a new iPhone. Now Chris went to school, shining with glory. He walked with confidence. But Harry spotted him again. How cool are those who use iPhones at school? The loser gang asked Chris where he was going. He took out his iPhone. "Are you kidding me? No way." Chris headed straight for the Apple Gang and sat directly across from the girl he liked. The loser classmates, with their mouths wide open behind the door, could hardly believe it. Chris became the 7th person in the school with an iPhone. Girls from other gangs began to secretly glances at Chris. He could openly walk with the girl sitting opposite him after class. However, Chris' fate changed with the phone. After a few days, the wealthy man suddenly passed away. At the funeral, Chris secretly placed the wealthy man's phone in the pocket of the body, to be buried with him. But not long after, the boy received a text message from the wealthy man. Chris was startled. Was he still alive? He hurried to the graveyard to check, and mustered the courage to dial the wealthy man's number. Then he pressed his ear against the ground. At that moment, he heard a familiar ringtone from the graveyard. Chris could hardly believe it. What was happening? It turned out that when Chris was 8, his mother passed away. He became introverted and withdrawn. One day, while Chris was reading in the church, he caught the attention of Mr. Harrigan, the richest man in the state, because Mr. Harrigan's eyesight was failing due to his old age. He hired Chris to read books and newspapers for him, paying him $5 per hour. Mr. Harrigan lived in a mansion with luxurious interior decorations. The walls were adorned with priceless paintings. Mr. Harrigan sat in the center of his study, and Chris read to him. But Mr. Harrigan had a bad reputation. There were rumors online that Mr. Harrigan was a ruthless person, and whoever crossed him would die. In other words, all of Mr. Harrigan's business competitors met with unfortunate ends. But Chris didn't care about those rumors. The old man treated him very well, and often gave him lottery tickets as gifts. Time flew by, and 5 years passed, and happens the accident of Chris with Harry. He sought advice from Mr. Harrigan on how to deal with being bullied at school. Mr. Harrigan's response was decisive and direct. He should fight back fiercely. Chris deeply engraved those words in his heart. Chris told Mr. Harrigan that his dream was to become a screenwriter. On his birthday, he received a phone as a gift from his father. But surprisingly, The lottery ticket that Mr. Harrigan bought for himself has won, and Chris turned out to be the beneficiary, so he bought an iPhone as well, and gifted it to Mr. Harrigan. Billionaire Harrigan, surprisingly, didn't know how to use a smartphone. His reason was that it would consume too much of his time, which could be spent on reading and watching news. At that moment, Chris casually opened an app on his phone and demonstrated to Harrigan all the things that could be done on a smartphone. He showed that it could be used for stock trading, reading news, and listening to music anytime. Harrigan suddenly felt outdated and gladly accepted the gift. They even set each other as important contacts with personalized ringtones. Harrigan, being a business tycoon, quickly realized the future of smartphones within a few days. Some apps would start as free to use, but eventually introduce paid content, pop-up spam ads, and eventually spread false news. Chris was impressed by Harrigan's predictions. Harrigan's lawyer contacted Chris, and Mr. Harrigan gave him $800,000 as tuition fees and opening for his future career. Shortly after, Harrigan's health deteriorated. One day, as usual, Chris came to read to Harrigan. But to his surprise, Harrigan was motionless in his chair. Having passed away, Chris was at a loss for what to do. Suddenly, his phone rang, and the caller was Harrigan himself. It turned out that before his departure, Harrigan wanted to make a call to himself. Chris took Harrigan's phone. He sat down and performed one final reading for him. At the farewell ceremony, Chris had a sudden idea. The boy is really audacious. He actually put the phone into the pocket of a deceased person and buried it with him. However, something eerie happened. The next day, Chris received a text message from Harrigan. The content of the message was, "CCCAA, could it be that he's not dead yet?" And sent the message from inside the coffin. He quickly went to find his father and told him what had happened. But his dad firmly said, "It's impossible, son." Mr. Harrigan was determined to have died from a heart disease after the autopsy. He couldn't have survived. It might be someone playing a prank or a case of number spoofing. Carrying his doubts, Chris lived for another 2 months. He was doing well at school, and even the girl he liked took the initiative to ask him to the campus dance. Just as they finished dancing, Harry came to bother him again. It turned out that Harry had already been expelled from school for selling drugs. He believed that Chris had snitched on him, so he took him outside. Chris remembered what Harrigan had said, "Fight back fiercely when faced with bullying." He punched Harry in the face, but his punch was strengthless. Chris was badly beaten up by the school bully. Harry crossed Chris's hands and rubbed them forcefully against the ground. Once again, it was Mr. Johnson who came to the rescue. He also helped treat Chris' wounds. Chris was extremely grateful to him. The boy was bullied, and he directly called the deceased person on the phone. In the voicemail, he complained to Harrigan about facing the bullying and fighting back, but without success. He was beaten badly. However, something strange happened the next day. Harry unexpectedly died. He fell from height, and the way he landed was exactly the same as when Chris was being bullied. With his hands crossed on the ground, Chris couldn't believe it. Could it be that Harrigan had turned into a ghost and dealt with Harry for him? In the evening, Chris gathered his courage and called Harrigan again, questioning him if he was responsible for Harry's death. He asked Harrigan to knock on the wall 3 times if it was him. Chris sat up and listened intently, but there was no sound. It seemed it wasn't Harrigan. Chris was relieved, but suddenly his phone rang. The phone suddenly rang, and he was scared, breaking into a cold sweat. The caller was none other than the deceased Harrigan. Chris stared at the phone, too afraid to answer. After a while, the call ended. Chris picked up the phone, getting ready to check it. But suddenly, a text message came in. The phone slipped from his hand and fell to the ground. Chris crawled over in fear to look at the phone. Oh my! It was a message from Harrigan, and it read, "AACCC." Chris was bewildered. Not knowing what was going on, Chris told the priest, and the priest suggested checking the phone to see if it had been hacked. So Chris bought a new phone and tried calling Harrigan, but the call failed to connect. Chris breathed a sigh of relief, thinking that his phone had indeed been hacked, which explained the previous occurrences. He then sealed the original phone in a box. And so, 2 more years passed. Chris finally got accepted into his dream university. But shortly after starting school, he received a call from his father. It turned out that his favorite teacher, Mr. Johnson, had passed away in a car accident while on vacation. And the culprit was a drunkard, who had a history of drinking and driving offenses, 4 times in total, because he was very wealthy. He hired a high-profile lawyer to represent him in court. And in the end, the court only sentenced the drunkard to 4 years, and mandated him to go through luxurious alcohol rehabilitation. What kind of judgment was that? Chris felt outraged for his unjustly deceased teacher. He rushed back home, unearthed the dusty box, charged up the phone, and then dialed Harrigan's number. He told Harrigan about Mr. Johnson's injustice, hoping he could
was
seek
drunk.
revenge on behalf of the teacher.
I want him dead.
After that, Chris lived in a state of unease. He followed the local news every day. And finally, he saw the news of the drunkard's mysterious death. Though he had avenged the teacher, Chris felt incredibly uneasy. He indirectly learned from investigators that the drunkard's cause of death was very peculiar. He had swallowed half a bar of soap while taking a shower and choked to death, and that soap happened to be the same brand that Mr. Johnson favored. Chris felt deeply guilty. He had used Harrigan to kill someone. Chris realized that the true meaning of Harrigan's last message, CCCST, was a plea for him to stop and quit early. Chris decided to put an end to all of this. He ran to the lakeside and threw the old phone directly into the lake. Mr. Harrigan, please rest assured that I will take care of myself. From now on, Chris bid farewell to the past and embraced a new life. The end. This film is called Mr. Harrigan's Phone. The question of this episode is, what brand is your phone? Leave your answer in the comments section. This film is based on the eponymous novel by Stephen King, who has many other notable works such as The Shining, The Shawshank Redemption, The Green Mile, and more. They are all great films. This film is enjoyable, and I recommend watching it. Remember to give a thumbs up. And don't forget to follow and subscribe. See you in the next episode. Bye.